Professor Matthew Beaumont, you are a professor of English at UCL, which is University College London, and the author of The Walker on Finding and Losing Yourself in the Modern City. And this is a perfect time to talk about this because suddenly we have rediscovered what our bodies are made for, which is exactly that, walking. And we have long forgotten that we are the only species in the planet that, yes, that's their main form of transportation, walking. So yeah, your book is quite apropos. I'm just so delighted that you're here. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan, very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So this is not your first book in regards to the topic of walking. You wrote another one called Night Walking. So I'm just curious about your maybe obsession with the activity of walking. But before we get there, can you give us a little bit of background information on who are you and how do you get into literature or writing and then this activity of walking?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I grew up in London, and my book on night walking, in fact, is, as the subtitle indicates, a nocturnal history of London. So it's a history of London at night, all the way from the Middle Ages to the 19th century. And much of this new book, which you've mentioned, The Walker, also centres on London, on writers who lived in and represented London. So I've lived in London most of my life, apart from a period when I was a student at Oxford University and then a PhD student. And I'm very committed to the city and to knowing the city and relearning the streets through walking, which I've done all my life, or at least as long as I can remember. But as you rightly say, the recent situation, the lockdown, the pandemic, have liberated us to become walkers again in city and country, but perhaps particularly in the city. There was a brief moment when we stopped using our cars. I'm afraid that's long past now, but everyone took to the streets as a form of sociability and as a form of getting to know the streets they live in again.
I like how you say it has liberated us, but some people don't see it as that. I mean, especially I'm here in North America, and people are quite attached to their vehicles, and they see walking as an imposition or maybe even an enforcement. But before we get into the subject, can we go a little bit into you personally? What drove you to study English? Who were you? What were your ambitions when you were a young man? And what drove you to this career?
I suppose that apart from walking, my great passion as a child and as a young man was reading, and I loved to read, which is of course a sedentary occupation. So perhaps it's the obverse of walking. Perhaps one of the reasons why I grew to love walking so much was because it was a way of not reading. So I would sit and read or lie and read for hours and hours and hours, and then shake myself out of this stasis and dynamically want to walk in the city or in the country. So I think the two activities are closely related for me, and not just because of that alternating rhythm between reading and walking, between stasis and dynamism, but because both of them in some ways engage similar organs, similar mental faculties, I think. Both reading and walking cultivate the imagination. And as a child, I love to cultivate my imagination both through reading and through walking. And it's something I've done all my life. And so for me, being a student of English literature, then doing a PhD, then getting a permanent job as a lecturer, then professor in English literature was a perfect way of of nurturing my love of reading, of sharing it with students, and the joy of working in University College London, where I've worked for more than 15 years now, is that it's about an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half's walk from where I live, so I can walk to work, I can read, I can teach books, and then I can walk home again, and I don't want to make out I've got a perfect life. I haven't. Like everyone, it's complicated and muddled and confused. But I'm very lucky in being able to, you know, to sort of support those two activities which all my life I've loved.
Right, and well, me too. I have a love of walking. First of all, I work many hours in front of my computer, and then when I just cannot handle anymore, the only solution is just to put on my walking shoes and go walk aimlessly. I mean, I walk around my block one direction and the other one, and it feel like I am refreshed after that. And I know that many people use walking as a way to foster creativity. I mean, when they cannot find a solution for whatever problem they are, especially writers, when they are working on their plots and try to fix how one character fits into the plot or the life of other characters, the solution is just to go out for a walk.
That's absolutely right. There's a long history of writers who've used walking, and today I'm sure you're right that plenty of writers still do that. That they ponder problems, that they make mental breakthroughs in plotting and in developing characters when they're writing novels, for example, through the business of walking. It's a way of bracketing off everyday life without disengaging from it completely. But that long history of writers who have walked has interested me for a long time, and I came to realize through my teaching over the course of years that there was a tradition of writers not only who had walked in the day, like the great romantic poets, Wordsworth, etc., but who had walked at night. And in walking at night, in particular, they had freed their imaginations, and they had found a way almost equivalent to taking some kind of a narcotic of of yes, cultivating the wilder reaches of their imagination, experimenting with themselves, going deep into them, inside themselves, exploring their neuroses, their fears, in a way that, because they were relatively isolated, because of the darkness, because of the solitariness and emptiness and even alienation of the city in particular, yeah, that they got to explore another, perhaps a darker side of themselves, which they could then write about.
Do you think we as humans, little by little, are coming back and re-embracing walking? And I'll give you a couple of examples. My city where I am, Montreal, all of a sudden is closing major commercial cities to automobiles, and now they have become pedestrian cities, streets. And I know that many major cities in Europe are doing the same, especially, I don't know, Holland, for example, they have just closed out many streets. And then because of that, they become even bigger tourism attractives. This is where a place where people feel comfortable hanging out, shopping, or just doing nothing other than people watching. So do you think little by little we are embracing that and we are just saying, well, it's nice to have an automobile to go long distance, but maybe it should be part of my lifestyle to just take a walk every now and then?
I'd like to think that we're making progress in along the lines that you've suggested. I mean, it's taken an ecological crisis of apocalyptic dimensions to bring this into focus and to initiate some of those programs of pedestrianization that you're talking about in North America and in Europe. So there's something quite shocking about that. And there are plenty of places where this kind of change is not happening. I mean, Los Angeles, I suspect, is not, making itself any more pedestrian friendly. But there's still an awful lot to do, I think. I'm pleased that that there are attempts to free us of some of the traffic fumes and some of the pollution that is blighting our lives, and particularly the lives of our children. But yeah, there's a lot still to be done. So I think there needs to be campaigning to further pedestrianize streets, but not to pedestrianize streets in such a way that it just domesticates them, that it turns them all into shopping precincts, as it were. I think we have to preserve the wildness of the city without compromising in terms of the ecology of the city and the environment.
Do you think, I mean, this is a sad question, but do you think walking in a city is a white man privilege? I mean, we all seen the news. If you are black in the United States, you could just get shot, as sad as it is. And we have seen videos of that. And if you are a woman, especially if you happen to be pretty or walking or having something pretty, you are doomed to be harassed. And people whistling in the streets. I've seen videos of women walking on the streets of Paris and where there are just harassed, even here. I mean, I've seen videos of hidden cameras with I guess good looking woman, and then they are just not able to get from place A to place B without someone saying something to them.
Yeah, I mean, what women look like, I mean, whether they're judged pretty or not pretty is almost irrelevant, actually. Just by being a woman, you are making yourself susceptible in walking on the streets, and in particular walking the streets at night, to abuse and harassment of the kind that you've described. It's a nasty power relation that obtains in and structures the streets that we inhabit, and it's very shocking. You're also right that people of color suffer the same kind of discrimination in the streets. So pedestrianism, the act of walking, is not simple for them, as you say, as it is for white men like me. And I was particularly conscious of this when I was writing my book about night walking, about walking at night, and when I was doing a lot of walking at night myself, that I was exercising a privilege that many didn't have. Women and people of color are particularly vulnerable at night to harassment. My friend, the novelist Will Self, was who I did an event with around the time my book on night walking came out, had the brilliant idea, completely impossible to imagine actually being implemented, but he had the brilliant idea of city mayors imposing curfews in which men are not allowed to go out, but women are. He said, city mayors should be imposing curfews so that women are allowed out 3 nights of the week with no men on the streets whatsoever, so that they can enjoy the freedom of the streets that we've always enjoyed. And I think it's a brilliant idea.
Wow. Okay. So, Matthew, I wonder if you could just give us a small summary of your book. What can a reader expect to find when they open that first page?
Well, the first chapter, the introduction, is more polemical, I suppose, than the rest of the book. And it's an attempt to ask what the politics and what I call the poetics, the aesthetics of walking are today. And why it's more polemical, that chapter, than subsequent ones, which mainly focus on different writers from the 19th century to the late 20th century who have written about walking in cities. Why that introduction is more polemical is because I wanted to attack this phenomenon that we see prevailing in our streets today of so-called distracted walking. In other words, that walking that we do, and I'm guilty of it at times too, when we walk and we look at our phones, we make phone calls, we text, we do emails, we watch movies or TV series. Every time I go into the streets in London, there are people doing this. 4 out of every 10 people at least are on their phones, and they are shutting out the city. They are sealing themselves off from the environment they're inhabiting. And that's bad for them. It's bad for them because they're impoverishing their life. They're impoverishing their imagination, their sensuous existence, their physical existence. It's impoverishing the city, I think, because bits of the city are just disappearing around us without us even noticing. And it's also making us, I think, this is a connected point, politically unconscious. It's making us unable to see how the city is being colonized by, in many cases, by private interests, by capital, by corporations, in such a way that we are being excluded from it, particularly as pedestrians. In London, parks are surreptitiously being privatized. They are being, bits of them are being cordoned off at certain times of the year. Private events are held there, which you have to pay to get into. In all of these ways, the commons, the idea of communal space, is being eroded and taken away from us. And by walking, and walking in a way that is alert and sensitive to our environment, is not only good for us, it's good for our cities.
Wow. Okay. What would you say is the difference between night walking and day walking? Because, of course, you have a separate book to highlight night walking, but in a regular Joe Blow um, life, what are the main differences?
In some ways, I think walking at night has some of the mysterious aura, the mysterious energy of the nighttime since prehistoric times. That night remains, however enlightened we are, however sophisticated and civilized we are, there is something about the night that, perhaps for very basic, almost genetic reasons, frightens us. That association with the unknown, with the mysterious, with the irrational and incomprehensible. So walking at night, which, as you've said, is a male privilege and a white male privilege, is a means of exploring that otherness, that alienness, that darkness, in a moral sense as well as in a physical sense. And it can remind us, amongst other things, not only of a kind of darkness that we've never fully managed to eliminate as human beings, however developed our technologies of illumination and however sophisticated our cities are. It's also a way, I think, of reminding ourselves of the fact that cities are built on land, on the earth, that they are layerings of nature and culture. So at night, it's possible to remember, for example, when you climb a steep street on foot, that you are climbing a hill. In the daytime, we forget that. We complain. We think, oh, God, I'm out of breath. This is too steep. Oh, it's too far to get to the bus or whatever. But we don't think, hang on, but what is this? What is this topographically? What is this geographically? At night, when there aren't so many people around, when there isn't lots of traffic, when we're not in a rush to get home or to get to work, we remember that the city has its own distinct topography, and that beneath the concrete, beneath the stone, there is some other magical landscape.
Right. On your book, you talk about the walking patterns of many artists, authors. I wonder uh, if you could expand on these walking patterns. I mean, I tell you, when I travel, for example, my travel schedule is to walk the whole day is possible. I just go and discover the city by foot because there's no other way. I mean, you cannot see it from a bus or whatever. You cannot have, when I'm at home, I just walk around my neighborhood just as a way to refresh my brain. And sometimes, as a transportation, I put a limit. If I can get there in 1 hour and come back in 1 hour, I do about walking. Otherwise, I take some other kind of transportation. So I wonder what walking patterns some of these authors had, and what are you walking on walking patterns?
There are many different walking patterns, I suppose, that writers have shaped and conformed to. Perhaps the best example I can give is Charles Dickens, who was one of the great walkers. I mean, in English literature, the Romantic poets, of course, are very famous. people like Wordsworth, who I've mentioned, famous for walking in the countryside, in the Lake District, in Scotland, in Wales, etc., amongst the mountains, these sublime landscapes. But Dickens, in the mid-19th century, was walking both at night and in the day very fast in order to escape himself, as well as in order to cultivate his imagination in the ways that we've been describing writers doing. He walked at according to his friends and contemporaries who complained about this, at 4.5 miles an hour. Now you will know, because you obviously do a lot of walking, Alain, that as I know, that is very, very fast. And he sometimes kept that up for hours and hours and hours. He would walk the whole way through the night, 25, 30 miles. And so he was a sort of heroic walker. But there have been other walkers too, I think, other writer walkers who've approached that level of epic and heroic walking. My own patterns are, well, I tend to commute on foot. I go to my office and back, as I've said. But sometimes, and this is the best thing of all, but we have to create time for this. I like to just walk and see what happens, just to drift. The French avant-gardists of the post-war period, the situationists call it dérive, drift. So they like to just walk and open themselves up in walking to a kind of patternless pattern, to strange encounters, to the unexpected. That's the best way of walking, really, is just to walk in any direction and decide on a whim where to go, how to turn, which street to walk up, that kind of thing. And maybe one will meet someone interesting, or maybe one will see something that one has never seen before. That's the ideal pattern, I think, right. Is a sort of non-pattern.
Well, Matthew, I think society is changing. Like right now, people are not longer obliged to go to an office to work. Most people are working from home. Those privileged to have that, to be in those circumstances, and of course now they had to figure out, what do I do for my physical well-being? And if they don't have to go and back and forth to an office, maybe they will take more walking as part of their everyday lifestyle. It's not just through this COVID-19 period, but as COVID goes by and people now have discovered that they don't need to go to an office, that they can work from home, then maybe they could start a daily ritual of walking in the evening or in the afternoon or whenever it is that they want to change from one mindset to the other one. So I think there is hope for people who love walking, and because that's what our bodies are made for. They are not made for sitting down. They are not made for driving. We are not horses. We don't do for extremities. We are made for walking, and not only that, walking long distances. So I think there's going to be a retake on that in the next few years.
I very much hope you're right. I like your idea of the ritual. I think it's important to build walking in as a ritual, as an everyday ritual, as you suggest. Otherwise, we'll just end up sitting in front of our computers at home and getting more and more turned in on ourselves. And we will lose the benefits of not having to go to an office by bus or by train or by car. The time will contract and we'll lose the freedom. So I think you're right. We have to consciously build rituals into our lives involving walking. And, neuroscientists at the moment are doing lots of studies saying how beneficial it is, not just for our bodies, but for our brains, how it strengthens certain parts of the brain. So I think, it should be part of any program for renewed health in the aftermath of the pandemic.
Well, Matthew, this has been an amazing conversation. I suggest listeners pick up a copy of your book and use it as an inspiration to see how other people have implemented walking into their life. And can you tell us one more time the title of your book, and where can people follow you if there is a place to follow you?
Thank you, Alan. Yes, the book is called The Walker, on finding and losing yourself in the modern city, and it's published by Verso. And in fact, the best place to buy it is Verso because they've got very good deals, better that than Amazon and other vast corporations like that. I'm afraid I'm not really on any social media. I can be contacted through my university website, University College London. But yes, so that's the kind of I don't have any followers, as it were, but I like the idea that I might be followed in the street rather than followed virtually. But a crowd of people following me, perhaps on the street, rather than a crowd of people following me on Instagram.
Perfect. I will add links to Verso and then links to the book. Thank you so much, Matthew. This has been an amazing conversation.
Thank you, Alan, very much indeed.